Okay, so this paper should be in front of you. It is your spooky story planning sheet, and we're going to use this to develop our own spooky stories. You should notice that this has the same exact format as the one we did for the Tale of the Lonely Ghost, which was the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode we watched on Monday. So you need to make sure you have that out too as a reference point. So the first thing you're going to do in your spooky story is introduce a hook that will engage your reader and make them want to read more. So you should do something to make your reader curious or excited about your story. I gave you some ideas. You could use a flashback, flashing back into the past, an intense moment that makes the reader curious about what's going to happen. Dialogue, make sure you format the dialogue correctly with quotation marks and a new paragraph after each time a new person is speaking. And onomatopoeia, which is a word that sounds like the noise that it makes, like snap, crackle, pop. Make sure that your hook is interesting and engaging. The next thing you need to include is setting and suspense. So, where will the story take place? Make sure you're being very descriptive. Remember what we did on Tuesday with our handout about the haunted house and the woods, where we added those very descriptive words about what we saw, what we tasted, what we touched, what we smelled, and what we heard. You should have those kinds of descriptions for your setting. It needs to be spooky, and you need to develop suspense at the beginning. So think about ways that you could increase the suspense and increase your readers' interest and curiosity about what's going to happen next in your story. Next, you need to focus on background information. Remembering when we watched the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, they provided background information about the girl, Amanda, going to stay with her aunt for the summer because her parents were scientists. You need to provide some background information to set us up for why we are in this particular moment in your story. Why is this taking place in your story right now? Situation. What situation will your characters face? So what is the context for your story? Then you're going on to do character traits. You don't need to fill out each of these boxes, so you don't necessarily need 4 characters in your story. I would suggest having at least 3 characters. Some of you might have more than 4 characters and you might need to attach a sheet to this. But you're going to list your character's name. You're going to list character traits that you can use to describe that character. I would suggest looking at the handout in your reading binder under the reading tab of character traits. So you have a list there. And physical description. That's where you're describing what the character looks like. Remember to go as creepy as you can. We said when in doubt, freak them out. So go as creepy and freaky as you can with your scary characters. But you want to make your good characters good. Just like Jack Black said in that video, we want to make our good characters good so our reader roots for them to survive the scary story. For conflict, you need at least 2 conflicts, one internal and one external. So you're going to write in this box over here the conflict specifically and then what type of conflict it is. So if you look at our sheet, we said like Amanda versus Beth, man versus man, all in the same box. I want to see that same kind of deal for you. I want to know what's your conflict, what type of conflict is it, why is the conflict occurring, and how was the conflict resolved somehow in the story. This stuff is typically going to take place at the end of your story. Then you have your creepy stuff and sensory details. You're telling me what people, places, and things will be creepy. And how will these things play a role in the story? This is where you're really going to bring in those vivid adjectives and sensory details that we talked about on Tuesday. So you're going to hit me with the really creepy things that you see and smell and taste and touch and feel and why they're important to the plot of the story. Making sure your story has a solid beginning, middle, and end. Looking at your checklist, these are the things that are going to be used then to develop what kind of grade you get on the rubric. You need a unique title. So I'm looking for a title that's interesting, engaging, summarizes your story. I don't want you to title it Spooky Story or Scary Story. I want it to have a unique, interesting title with an engaging, exciting hook, a spooky setting that is detailed in very specific detail, alluding to those 5 senses like we practiced, suspenseful moments that leave the reader nervous or confused or curious, characters with traits that can be understood based on what the character says, thinks, feels, and does, Go back to thinking about and looking at your notes about what we did when we watched those movie clips of Toy Story and SpongeBob and Inside Out, and how the creators of those used what the character was saying, thinking, feeling, and doing to tell us about the character. Do that in your writing. You need a well-developed beginning, middle, and end. So think about the plot diagram that's in the front of the room. You should represent all of those elements of plot in your writing. Your conflicts need to be well-developed, interesting, and resolved, unless you leave your readers with a cliffhanger at the very end of the story, where you leave maybe one conflict not resolved. Dialogue needs to be used throughout, so I am requiring dialogue for this. You need to make sure you have conversations between characters or between characters and villains, and you need to make sure you punctuate it correctly. So we've gone over quotation marks so many times, commas so many times. You should know how to capitalize, punctuate, and use quotation marks in your dialogue. And every time you have a new speaker with your dialogue, it needs to be put into new paragraphs. Creepy elements throughout that are described in detail. Language throughout is specific, descriptive, and vivid. So you're pulling in those adjectives. Remember how I said I don't want you to say the monster ate the girl with its teeth. I want you to get into the green hairy monster mashed on the girl's skin with its yellow pointy teeth, tearing away her flesh and leaving rotting holes smelling of a stench of rotting flesh. Something like that, where you're really adding in those creepy details. And obviously, in your final draft, you're going to proofread for mistakes in COPS, capitalization, punctuation, and spelling. In general, on Thursday, you're going to be working on completing this checklist. Once you finish this planning sheet, you are going to be starting to write your draft in your notebook. Remember how I said on Tuesday that on Friday and Monday we're going to be typing these stories. They need to be 2 typed pages roughly. Some might be a little bit more than that, and that's totally fine, but 2 typed pages is really what I'm shooting for in 12-point font, Times New Roman. You are going to make sure that you are writing in your notebook. To have about 2 typed pages, you're going to need at least the front and back of 2 written pages in your notebook. So, if you give me a paragraph or you give me just 1 page in your notebook, the front of 1 page, and say you're done, that's not going to be long enough to get you the fully developed story that includes all of these elements that we talked about. Remember that the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode was like 25 minutes long. That would be pages and pages and pages of written work to fully develop all of these elements. And I'm not even asking for that much. I'm just asking for 2 typed pages, okay? Be sure while you're writing your draft in your notebook, you're looking at the checklist right here, and you can check your work off while you're doing that, that the substitute teacher gave you. Make sure you're looking at your rubric. That's what I'm going to be used to grading it. I need to have those rubrics turned back in, not now, but when we go to the computer lab and you actually submit your essay in Google Classroom. So you're not turning them in now, but you need to use it to reference for yourself. Use the said as dead sheet that has all the words you could use other than said, so that way your dialogue isn't all she said, he said, they said, and you have some more interesting words. Use your sensory details handout to help you remember different types of descriptive adjectives you can use to hit all of the senses. Use your Are You Afraid of the Dark handout as guidance to help you remember what is a good conflict, what's a good setting, what's a good theme. When we go to the lab on Friday, we're going to meet upstairs in Lab 207. I need to make sure that you bring with you your notebook with a draft in it, your rubric, and all other handouts that we've done for the spooky stories. So maybe you put all of those inside your notebook when you're done today, and you put that in your locker to grab with you for tomorrow. That's all I have. If you have any questions, ask our substitute teacher, and I will see you guys on Friday.